Let's see how we can conduct dependent t-test in SPSS. A couple of very important things with the dependent t-test is, first, we are testing the same participants and we're testing them at two different time periods. The traditional dependent t-test is utilized in a pre-test, post-test kind of design, where we're giving our participants a pre-test or a baseline, then we're doing some kind of intervention, and then we're testing them again at post-test to see if there are changes in between pre-test and post-test, and we're hoping that those changes are due to the intervention that we have conducted. So here is a database where we have students. They've taken a class and they have homework 1, homework 2, homework 3, and homework 4 assignments. Now we're going to focus only on homework 1 and homework 2. That's one of the restrictions with the dependent test, that we are limited only to two time periods, where we're testing to see if there are significant differences between time 1 and time 2. Now with the dependent t-test, we have to be careful in terms of we have to measure the same characteristics in our participants, and we have to use the same tool to measure that characteristic. So, for example, if we're measuring scholastic aptitude, in time 1, if we have administered SAT test, in time 2, we cannot really use the ACT test, for example, even though the test measures the same characteristics, because we have different measurements of scale, right? So we have the SAT that goes from like 200 to 1200 or 1400, I don't remember now, versus the ACT that goes from 0 to 32. So even though those two instruments are measuring the same thing, the same characteristics, their scales are very, very different. So we have to remember that we do need to use the same instrument to measure that characteristic. Another important thing is that we have to match our scores across participants. So if this is Johnny, we want to make sure that this is Johnny's first score and this is Johnny's second score. If this is Mary, we want to make sure that this is Mary's first score and this is Mary's second score. This is very important because the dependent t-test runs or works under the assumption that because we have the same participant measured at time 1 and time 2, there's a lot of variability that could be explained due to the fact that that's one and the same person versus two different people taking the test. So that's why this is a very, very important piece that we have to be careful about when we do a dependent t-test. Okay, so let's see how we can run the dependent t-test in SPSS. We said we're going to focus on homework 1 and homework 2, and we want to see if there are significant differences between those two. So if we said that this is homework 1, after taking homework 1, students have received instruction or practice, and then they take homework 2, we want to see if there are any significant changes. To do that, we can go under Analyze, Compare Means, and that's what we're doing, right? So we are comparing the mean of homework 1 to homework 2 to the mean of homework 2. So under compare means, we're going to go under paired sample t-test. That's another name for dependent t-test that if you guys read in the literature, you may see it as a paired samples t-test. We call it a paired samples t-test because we have paired scores, right? So we have a pair of scores for each participant, and then we are comparing across those pairs. So that's why it's also called paired samples t-test in addition to the dependent t-test that we call it. So we're going to click on that, and here's our window. Under variable 1, we're going to put one of our scores, and on variable 2, we're going to put the other. At this point, it doesn't really matter which one goes where. What is going to matter is how we're going to interpret those. So I'm going to grab homework 1 and drag it over. You can either click and drag, or you can just highlight and hit the little arrow and it's gonna move it. Okay, that's all we need for here. We're gonna click OK, and here's our output. SPSS gives us a handy little table with the descriptive statistics. So we have what's the mean score for homework 1, what's the mean score for homework 2, their standard deviations, and their standard errors. Our second table tells us what is the correlation between homework 1 and homework 2. And actually we would expect that to be relatively high and significant, since we're measuring the same participants and we're measuring the same characteristics. It makes sense that this would be highly correlated. So we're not going to really report on anything from table 2, but it's just so that we know that's what it means, that correlation that SPSS gives us. The most important table is a paired samples test table. So we know that SPSS computes homework 1 minus homework 2. These and 3 columns is what's the most important. Under the significant column, we can see whether our test is significant or not. So in our case, we have 0.046, which is less than 0.05. That is significant. So we can report our results. In our case, we would be there are significant differences between homework 1 and homework 2, and if we want to include the statistical notation, that would be a t with degrees of freedom of 44 equals whatever our t value is, in our case 2.054, and then comma, p equals 0.046, or we can just say p less than 0.05 to designate significance. Now if we want to take this a step further, we can go back and see, well, which homework score was actually higher than the other one. And we can look at 2 different places. So we can go back up to our descriptive statistics and look, well, homework 1 had a higher mean than homework 2, so actually homework 1 is significantly higher than homework 2. Another place, which is not that straightforward, is to look at that mean, right? So this is the mean difference. If this is a positive number, means that homework 1 is higher than homework 2, right? We're having a larger number and subtracting a lower number, that's going to give us a positive difference. Or if this is negative, that means whatever our second variable was is higher than our first one. Again, it's going to be a little bit confusing, so probably going back to the descriptive table could be easier to interpret. So this is all there is to doing dependency test in SPSS.